Bien. Est-ce que tu as eu ce domaine une curiosité?
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's wait for like 3 more minutes and see if any more folks is gonna join, and then we can get started.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
How's everyone doing?
Pretty good. Are you? I think you're outside. Is that the new campus?
This is Starbucks outside of Starbucks.
Oh, okay. I'm at Starbucks too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's early for me to commute all the way.
So Ian, do you have anything to share for the?
I have some. I don't have anything formal, but I have some notes. I don't mind.
Yeah, that would be great.
Projecting.
Like sharing those notes would be great. Yeah.
Fine. Yeah. So let me see the agenda doc. So today it's mostly going to be me and James.
Yeah, so the tentative agenda today is you're going to talk about the pre-start, post-termination hook discussion, and then James is going to like give some background on the capability, Linux capability stuff, improvement that we did recently, and probably do a demo if possible. But yeah, so that's the tentative agenda. And if we
Right.
have more time, we can dive into more stuff. And probably like doing a status update on the rest of the items on that spreadsheet.
I see. So yeah, I guess we can time box the first topic to, I don't know, like 20 to 30 minutes, because I know that James has something that he's working on, the host port isolation Jira, that we can discuss and give them more feedback, and that's more
Okay. Yeah. So
further along.
How about this? Let's do 20 minutes the discussion and time box the first discussion in 20 minutes, and then the next like 35 minutes is gonna be James doing both the Linux capability stuff. I hope that we can wrap this up in like 15 minutes, and then do the rest of the discussion on the host port isolation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. I think like since we have a pretty tight schedule, let's get started.
Okay.
Sharing the screen.
All right, I will find the. Here's my Google Doc. Okay. I just need to share my screen. Just a sec. It's loading. Okay. So everyone can see my screen?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I linked the Jira that Jason created, but unfortunately he's not here today. I'd love to listen to everybody's use cases so that we can prioritize things accordingly. But let me first start with why, because outside of this general feature that seems to be popular and which just makes sense, and OCI defines it, Kubernetes defines it, and Docker has a issue open for it. But the reason that we want to spend time on this is that internally, for a couple of cases now, we just want to have something that's hooked, which gets executed before the container is established, and another one gets executed when the container tears down. And there's actually another one which is interesting, that we have this body process that keeps doing some management work throughout the life cycle of the container. But it can be started certainly at the start of the container lifecycle. You just don't, even if it's a hook, the hook doesn't have to terminate, right? You can have it like if it's like a in this terminology, a post start hook. It doesn't have to terminate. It can be a long running thing. I guess there's no reason to say that shouldn't happen. But basically, we have these cases, and right now, what we're doing is that we have a custom isolator module, which is just calling out a whole bunch of commands, and then we decided to do more. Then we started to think, well, why don't we just have this as a very generic thing, and just specify these commands as hooks, and we can then execute them. So that's why we wanted to do this.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. One question is who's going to specify the commands? Is the framework is going to specify the commands, or the isolator writer or the operator is going to specify the commands for those pre-start and post-stop?
So in this particular case, there are two things. One, I think it would make more sense to be specified by the operator. And two, definitely it's going to be executed in the host context rather than the container context. Because it's doing, so there are two things that the hooks can be associated with, right? One is to customize the container, and the other is to do additional management work. So the latter would make sense to be in the host context, and the former probably in the container context. So we want the latter.
There's very little you can do to customize the container at this point, right? Because generally customizing the container requires, doing a magic handshake with the launcher, which is very hard from an external command.
Well, we were.
Go ahead. YanX.
No, I was just saying we can already do that, right? We have launch command, launch info, and the launch info has pre-exec commands. So right now, these pre-exec commands are specified by, are prepared by individual isolators, but I don't see a reason they cannot be specified by the operator.
So I have a follow-up question. So I thought hooks were supposed to be synchronous. And as far as I understand hooks in Mesos, and adding commands to hooks seems pretty dangerous given that these will be synchronous calls.
No, I'm not sure. I think they're talking about the pre-exec commands, which is like executor in not inside the agent process. It's being like a
okay. So I misunderstood this.
Initialization, like a helper.
Okay.
It's okay to be blocking there because that's just blocking the start of the container.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
Right. So even for even when we're talking about the command that gets executed in the host context, it certainly shouldn't block either the agent or the containerizer. It should just block the life cycle progress of that container itself.
Okay. So
right?
yeah. I think I have another question. Sorry about that. So I have another question to clarify. So the question is like you mentioned you want some process to be long running inside like a long running process, sort of like a sidecar that's not like a short command that you're gonna execute before container launch.
In this case, actually, it's not inside of the container. So for our particular case, it's still part of the management work. So we want it to be privileged, and we want it to be out in the host context. So it's basically just the helper for the containerizer or for the isolator.
I see.
In this case, not isolator. Yeah, for the containerizer.
I see. I think the crux here is you want that to be privileged, so it has root permission basically, because otherwise you can use nested container, right? So the executor can launch. Your custom executor can launch a container inside the pod, like inside the executor container, and that will be long running, and the executor can manage the lifecycle.
Right, certainly, 100%. So, so I do think there are cases that's not covered by, the related work that other projects have done. So, and that could be actually what's pretty interesting for us.
Can you get some background? Like for example, post-start, pre-stop in Kubernetes. Do you know is that a command that user can specify in the pod spec, and then it's basically like a user can specify those commands?
Right. So in this case, well, I realize if I click these links, will I lose the screencast?
No, I think you're fine.
Oh, okay. So actually, this is a link to the definition of a hook or a handler in Kubernetes. So as you can see, it could be, so Kubernetes has handlers can be sort of like ours, right? It can be a command, which is the exact action, or it can be HTTP, it could be TCP. I think it is just reusing some already defined functionality. So there's no way, no reason to just limit to system commands. So this is pretty generic.
Yeah. So where that
this,
handler is being specified, like in which, like in POSPAC?
Where it is specified, it should be just in the definition of the containers. So
Okay.
as you can see here, you have the spec containers, and in the containers you have the life cycle, pre-start, a post-start, and pre-stop, and you give it a bunch of commands and some.
And it's guaranteed that those commands going to be executed in the host environment, like the Kubernetes environment.
No. So in this case, it's actually executed in the container.
Okay, so that's slightly different than the stuff you guys wants to do, because if I understand correctly, what you guys wants to do is have some process in the agent process, agent like namespaces to do privileged stuff, whereas different like Kubernetes, like basically these things are like those post-start and pre-stop things, you can totally implement those logic inside your custom executor if you want to.
Right. Yeah. So that's
slightly different. Like I would more think about like post-start as like like init pod, things like init container inside a pod, things like that. But anyway, yeah, I think like the concept are slightly different because the things that you guys wants to do like has to be in the agent context.
Right. So
which part makes sense to ask the isolator to control that, and which essentially means like the operator will control the commands that are going to execute for each container, because it doesn't make sense to ask user to specify some commands that's going to be host dependent.
So yeah, and I think I kind of captured some of the discussions on this Docker ticket. So here's the Docker ticket, but I basically copied over some comments. So I think in our case, we have basically the same concerns. You have some of the commands. So we don't currently have the use cases for these kind of hooks inside of the container context, but I think it's just general enough that I would imagine some people would desire that. So in that case, probably the same set of lifecycle events, you can probably specify commands for both the host context and the container context, and you just have to clearly distinguish them. And probably will always make sense to specify the host context hooks by the operator and the container context hooks by the framework. I haven't thought too thoroughly whether that's always going to be the case, but sounds like it's probably true. So, and here's another comment. So, who's going to execute the commands? So, right now we have pre-exec commands, which is done by the launcher. But I think to do things at a later stage, but also inside of the container context, I mean, we have methods just to enter the container and exec commands there. So it shouldn't architecturally be difficult for us to do either, even though we're not currently doing anything like this.
Yeah, I think like I mean, depends on what you need, right? You can also have like two set of things. Like one is inside the containers namespace, while like but it's not inside the containers file. It's kind of like a little complicated there. Like depends on what semantics you want. Do you want that command to share the same file system as the container? Do you want the command to share the same namespaces of the container? Or do you want a command to share the same C group of the container? Like we should answer those questions. But I think at a high level, I think like having an isolator doing like things like this makes sense to me. I think we just need to clearly define those semantics, like what the operator can specify. And I definitely don't want like user or the framework to be able to specify those commands. So it should be like
the commands that runs in the host context, right?
Yes, we definitely don't want user or framework to be able to
Sure.
specify that. But as an isolator and ask the operator to specify those commands for all the containers, I think that makes sense to me. But we need to define those semantics clearly, like what namespace you want. Like, does that share the same namespaces of the agent process or the container process? Depends on what you need, right? So we need to define those things.
Right. Okay. So so some other pieces of info from OCI, for example, I think some of them are pretty interesting, which we could probably use as our implementation, which is how do you, so basically they're the things that you need to define, which is whether it's blocking. In this case, OCI says, well, the pre-start should probably should be blocking, and if the pre-start hook terminate with an error, then the container should terminate. However, the post start hook should be executed probably not blocking the task, and when it fails, you should just log a warning, but you should not terminate the container. So something like this, I think we should also clearly define. So what does it mean to run this hook, whether it can block, and whether its failure will affect the container lifecycle. And we also need to decide whether to say that, well, post start should never terminate your container, or we actually have to specify that to have like a Boolean or some put a field to say whether you want this hook to terminate your container if it fails. So we need to decide that. Well, I don't have any of these, in my design yet. It's just that these things I think we should be concerned about.
Yeah, I think that all sounds good. I just want like you probably take a look at the OCI spec, see like what exactly the context of those pre-start, post-start, post-stop hooks, what namespaces and what C groups, and what the file system they're gonna assume, like things like that, and just to get a clear context on what they're doing right now and what's the right semantic we should support, things like that.
Right. So related to this is probably.
Sorry, James.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So what semantics would you think about when you actually support the OCI hooks? So I imagine that the OCI implementation will eventually want to support the hooks in OCI. So then you implement them, and you have the OCI semantics, right?
Yeah, so OCI, so this is a runtime spec. We don't have an immediate plan to support a runtime spec. We might want to support that in the future, but I don't have an immediate plan to support that because runtime spec has a lot of like low level. I mean, to me, runtime spec is implementation in detail. For example, like you will never expose the runtime spec to user directly, like because the runtime spec also specifies what C groups, what mounts, like what are the mounts, system mounts that you're gonna need for the container, which you don't want to expose that to the user directly. I think that like Kubernetes also don't expose those things to user directly. So to me, runtime spec is a implementation detail, how to realize a container spec that's specified by framework or a user.
But the hooks are specified in the container image, aren't they?
No.
Those
I thought that config was shipped around in the container image so that you could run it.
No, right. I think as far as I know, the hooks are in the runtime spec. The goal of those hooks is trying to allow things like a rocket to do networking stuff, like put a container into a network namespace, like do invoke CNI, things like that. I think that's the whole purpose of those hooks. At initially, I don't know what's being developed like later to support some more use cases. Anyway, so
Right.
to me, this is definitely in the runtime spec. I don't think there's any hooks inside the image.
Image.
Yeah.
That's what that's how I understand it. Yeah. So, am I still connected?
Yes, we can see
Okay.
that. So we have
Okay.
like just a time check. We have like 3 more minutes on this, and then
Okay.
James.
Right. So I sort of already gone through what the things that I've been considering, and I want to have feedback on by basically surveying the related work. But here's to summarize, right? So we need to decide, what hooks to export, to allow people to specify, and what context to run them, either host or the container. It's not clear to me yet whether each and every hook needs to have hooks on both sides. So we'll see. Perhaps some of them only make sense to be running in the host context, or some of them only in the container. And who runs them? I think it's pretty much true that we've agreed that it should probably be the runtime as an isolator. But if you put the burden on the executor, it's probably not going to be a pre-container. It's not going to be associated with the container anymore. It's just going to be associated with the task. And then, but nested containers can be associated with tasks. So I haven't even gone there yet, but it just seems to me
so correction. So nested container don't have to be tied with a single task. So the custom executor can feel free to launch nested container without a task. That's fine.
Right. I mean, it's often used by tasks.
Oh yes,
you're right.
Sure.
Yeah. So whether it should have a blocking behavior, and how should you handle the error, which is terminate or not terminate. Who specifies them? I think we've covered that. And okay, so I think we just have 1 minute, but here's actually what's interesting, which is what to provide to these hooks. So in one of our specific use cases, we actually want to expose the entire container config definition to the hook. So I think at least if we learn from the CNI hooks plugins, for example, you typically could just dump the whole thing as a JSON to the standard in, and have the hook parse it. But also, I think it's possible to have the API express some kind of a mapping from this container config protobuf to directly to a variable name, something like that. I think that's doable. So provide information to the hooks is interesting.
So you're talking about like the command that your executor wants to get the information about the container itself, and the way we pass those container config information is through STD, standard input and standard output. Sorry, standard input. It's not like just like a plain command. The command is also will read some information about container, do custom things.
Right. That's our use case. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I think this is also related to the other ticket I'm about to create, which is like support writing an isolator right now is pretty non-trivial. You have to know C++ and all these kind of detail in Mesos internal details. I think one thing we want to support definitely is we want to allow people to run an isolator in any language and package the isolator in a container, and then there will be a general isolator that talks to that container through some well-defined protocol like gRPC, so that like the isolator body itself can be written in any language and packed in that container. So that's something kind of related. I'm not sure like if that's going to satisfy your need or not. If you think that's okay, then I think maybe we should spend more time on that. Because I think that's more general than some like a command that you want to run on a host file system.
Well,
okay. Let me know if you feel like let me know like what do you think on this.
Right. Yeah. Let's hear your thoughts on that, because that's actually our initial. We were gonna do that, and then it feels like even if it's in another language, having because in a multi-team organization, if you don't want to have the other party learn C++, when they could just expose a command to you, then they probably don't want to learn how the isolator works either. So I see the two things as complementary, but both being useful. So yeah, let's follow up on that.
Yeah, we can do a follow-up. Maybe I can do a presentation on the idea on this container. Yeah, I'll take that as a note, and I'll do some presentation on the idea of that one. I think we have some need for that thing as well, and I think it's okay to have both, given the way we design isolator to be modularized. I think it's okay to have both, but if you think that the container-based isolator is going to satisfy your need, we can collaborate on this. All right, so I think
awesome.
That's pretty good. Once you finish the design, like I think that all sounds good. I think the main feedback is figure out what's the context for those commands and what are the for example resource. Who's gonna like which part like the resource used by those commands is gonna be like attributes to the container itself, or it's not like being tracked, things like that. It depends on whether you want to put the command into the C group of the container or not, things like that. So think about those kind of stuff.
Sounds good.
James, do you have anything to say?
No, I think we've discussed it with Ian before.
So I'm
not a huge fan of this kind of thing, but I think it's worth trying the model.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we should switch to the next topic.
So guys, before we wrap up, I still have one question. So it sounds to me like we have.
So Gilbert, your voice is very jammed. I'm not sure. Maybe your problem with your microphone.
Oh, really?
Oh, it's better now.
Yeah, I think it's better now.
You guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So before we wrap it up, so we still have. So it sounds to me generally we have two purposes. One is to support long-running process from the host. The operator can specify either it is from on the host process or from the container process. So which we can do it from the isolator, no matter it is a generic isolator or some others. So the other one is the pre-start and post-start hook, and that one I took a quick look on the OCI image spec and FC image spec, and actually it's the hook. It is the FC image. It contains the spec for the pre-start and post-start hook. It is in the event handler. So should that still be from the operated part when we specify a hook, when we specify executable, because it should overwritten by the framework to some extent if it is in the image spec.
Well, it's in FC, not in OCI. I don't think like I see that in OCI spec. Like to me, like FC is a dying spec. So whatever is specified there probably doesn't matter too much. I would just stick to OCI because I think even the CoreOS guys are switching to OCI support. So I don't think we should spend too much time on that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right, let's switch to the next topic. We have 30 minutes left. James, do you have anything to present?
I was basically going to do a demo, so I can do that.
Awesome.
So let me share my screen. So let me give you. I can just talk generally about background before I guess, so the work we have came out of, okay, is this one. All right, can you see that?
Yeah.
My terminal just went off the share.
If it's a lighter theme, would be better, but I don't know if it's.
Okay, is that visible?
Yes, it's pretty clear. Yeah.
Okay, is the text readable?
Yep.
Okay, so the context
Could you
of
zoom in
looking
just
at
a bit,
capabilities
James?
was, I think there was already capability support. I think Ben Bania did it originally. Our use case was to restrict capabilities. So we wanted to set the bounding set, and the way we specified the bounding set was to specify the capabilities that we wanted, and that seemed pretty unintuitive because it was almost like saying, I want to have these things for the purposes of getting kind of the opposite effect. So what I wanted to do with this is to be able to pretty clearly is to kind of simplify the capabilities model into the set of capabilities that you want to restrict and the set of capabilities that you want to hold. And so now we have those and they're termed bounding capabilities for the ones you want to restrict yourself to, and effective capabilities for the ones you actually want to hold and grant to your process. So you have the ability to limit privilege, but also grant more privilege. So let's just bring up master. And we can bring up an agent. So I'm just providing the capabilities isolator there. So there we go. Now we can run a job. I just got to remember the syntax for this thing. So, mesos-execute. Let's just do a simple ls job, and we can say the bounding capabilities are, now what's the syntax for that thing going to be? Capdac search, for example. And I muffed it. What did I miss? Yeah, and so that works. All right, so I think I can do user equals Jpeach, though there's no user option.
Yeah, you have to hard code it, the user.
Yeah, I think it's the user that launched the command. So if you launch using Vagrant, then it's gonna be Vagrant. But if you want to use
okay. So we can try something like this. So let's give it no capabilities. We can give it a bound. So okay, so give it bounding capabilities is empty. So let's do ls of root. Give it that. Okay, and that failed. But if we give it, we could give it bounding capabilities of DAC read search, and if we also give it effective capabilities, then it should work. And that completes successfully. So we can run commands with privileges, but not all the privileges, and we can prevent commands gaining those privileges. So we can run ping is the canonical. So if we run ping, but we only grant the effective and bounding set for cap read search, then that would fail. But if we add to the bounding set, we should see that. Oh, okay, because I didn't ping. So this is a status 2, so that's a usage error. Right. So there's it's pinging. So we can use that to restrict what the PLC is the bounding set to restrict capabilities that we don't want anything to have, so we can force things not to work. So there's basically the two use cases that we're trying to support here are, for security purposes, break things that depend on capabilities, and to do privileged operations with limited privilege, you can use your effective capabilities.
Yeah, I think like more important, like previously we don't support like a non-root users having certain capabilities. I think like this change also allow us to like say, hey, I'm nobody, but I can have like things like DAC research to list /root, things like that. So that's something that we don't support previously.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, and I think running as an unprivileged user, but network admin, network is useful for network applications.
Just a question. So, if I want to express that I have this bounding set of capabilities that don't want any of the processes to have, but if it's bounded by that, then the task of the user process will be allowed to do everything. Is that by just only give it a bounding set?
Sorry, I missed that. I couldn't understand the core of that question. Can you repeat it?
So, for example, if I need to execute, a bunch of commands which would require certain capabilities, I shouldn't need to explicitly grant them individually, right? I should be able to just give it upper bound, and then assuming my tasks can run whatever capability that is required.
That would work if your tasks have file capabilities set on their binaries. So if a capability is in the bounding set, then you can acquire that. If you're not root's a special case. So basically, the way you would acquire that capability is by executing a binary file which has those capabilities set on it.
Yeah, I think
so once they're in the bounding set, that will work.
Yeah, I think the bounding is basically like what's the maximum capability that container can acquire. I say some malicious container has some like a binary, special binary has like a set UID bit set or like have special file capability set. You can actually execute that binary to gain privilege. The binding capability like set this maximum bound so that like no matter what binary you're using, you cannot exceed that capability set. And effectively, basically, like the first process in that container, what's the capability that process is going to get, even if that process is not privileged. I say under no root users, that task or that process is going to have that capability to do things like for example, things like mount, which require sysadmin. You can just grant the process with sysadmin effective capabilities. Even the process itself is under like nobody, it can do things like mount.
Got it.
All right, thanks. I think that's great. Thanks, James.
I have a question. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, Greg.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'm wondering about if there are any plans to incorporate authorization into that feature, or are we just going to delegate the authorization of like who can set what capabilities to the frameworks themselves?
Yeah, I was about to ask the same question.
Yeah, so in general, I think the frameworks are generally part of the trusted compute base. So that's the approach we've been taking. So you, as an operator, you can specify effective and bounding capabilities on your agent, and the isolator constrains all the framework requests to be within the bounding capabilities that the agent has specified.
Somehow I get a feeling like the bounding capability should be tied to roles. I mean, you have a superset bounding capabilities for the agent themselves, but then the roles have their own, subsets of a superset bounding capability, and then the effective capabilities are chosen from that based on the framework. I mean, that kind of a hierarchical model makes sense. I mean, fits into the Linux user control model as well, right? At least user HCL model. So
aren't roles are all about resources, right? Roles aren't about roles.
Yeah, I don't know whether roles is the right thing. Probably Greg or G can.
Yeah, I think regarding authorization. So James, I think when like right now we have authorization for the framework user. Like say we have authorization say, hey, this framework can only register under user nobody, so that it cannot launch a task under user root, things like that.
Okay.
I think in part it makes sense to add authorization, like what capabilities that a framework can supposed to set, things like that, and then we authorize that. So that's one potential things we can do. But
yeah, that feels like it makes sense for effective capabilities. Definitely, I think bounding capabilities, because you're always restricting.
Yes.
Is probably. I'm not sure you need to authorize that, but I think I agree that effective capabilities would be interesting to authorize.
Yeah, and regarding bounding, I agree, because isolator, like the operator can already like set the maximum bounding capabilities. Even like the framework cannot override this; it will be rejected if its bounding is greater than the operator specified bounding. So we do have a safety line there. So the operator can say, no container on these machines can exceed bounding capability, this bounding capability, then it should be able to do that. He should be able to do that. So I think I'm less worried about that part. But yeah, I think like in general, like we push add authorization for that. Especially we have authorization for user, which kind of makes sense to do that. But we do have to add a lot of authorization for some other stuff too. So it's not just for capability.
Geez, so what you were just mentioning a mechanism for restricting the bounding capabilities like per agent. What's the mechanism for that?
So there's an agent flag called -- bounding capabilities.
Okay, gotcha.
So you can do that. So the operator can set a flag, say, hey, these are the capability that all the container on this host can get maximum. Like what's the maximum capability that all the container on this agent can get. So
and I guess the expectation is that all your agents are the same, because it would be wacky if you made them different.
All right, I think that sounds great. Thanks, James. And do you want to I think we have like 13 minutes left. Do you want to quickly discuss the port isolation stuff?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'd like to. So I guess I always thought that it was a long-standing problem in Mesos. Like when I first started being around Mesos, I was surprised. People would say to me, "Oh, you have to be careful about your apps listening on the right ports." And I was surprised that there wasn't already a Jira on this. So basically the idea here is to have an isolator which does pretty much what all the networking tools do, which is it scans your open processes, figures out what the listening sockets are, tries to associate them with containers, and then shoot you in the head if you're listening on anything that's not in your resources. There's a review. Let me share my screen again. So
okay, so you want to make sure that if a container listens on a port that's not allocated to that container, you want to kill that container. Is that the goal?
Exactly.
Okay.
So we want to make sure that that processes in a container are listening only on the ports that they've been allocated in resources.
And that's only for like a container using host network, because it's not.
Yeah, I mean, you could do it. You could do it for container networks. You'd have to basically enter their network namespace and muck around there. But
yeah, but there's no point in doing that, right?
I think the use case for it is pretty weak. So I haven't implemented that, and I don't really plan to.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. Like, especially if a container has its own network namespace, it should be able to use all the ports inside that container. So there's no point of restricting the container using certain ports.
Yeah. So I have some preliminary. I have some patches up here. So I put work in progress on the isolator itself. It needs a lot more tests. One thing that I found is that I haven't been able to run a successful job with the command executor, because the command executor uses libprocess, which listens on a port, and that port is not resource allocated.
Yeah, so but so that brings me another question. Like, what about those containers that wants to use the ephemeral port? I just wanted to bind to 0. I see. Yeah, I think like the normal setting we have is like when you start an agent, you specify a range of ports, like say 31,000 to 32,000 for a listening socket. But you also have some ephemeral ports which you don't do allocation, basically. And then you can do a bind 0. So that's basically the ports we are taking for the command executor. You want the framework to be able to allocate.
Oh, that's what James is talking about. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know how do we.
I thought you meant ephemeral port. I thought you meant the ephemeral ports which are bound from client sockets.
No, I mean I'm talking about bind 0. Someone wants to listening, but it will just listen on a ephemeral port, a port in the ephemeral port range.
Okay, then
I guess
still kill you because you're listening on a port that isn't allocated.
Yeah, so I think one thing you can do is look at the port resources.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can just look at port resources. Just make port a first class thing. Just look for the resources and look for those port resources, and then only enforce those. And for those port in the ephemeral port range, you don't do anything. You just allow them.
Well, I don't think that's really good enough, because that wouldn't So for example, if you ran a task which always listened on a hard coded port 80, then the isolator wouldn't kill that, but you actually
so 80 is not the ephemeral. 80 is not in the ephemeral port range. I think you should get the ephemeral port range by looking at proc file system. I think there's IP local port range in the.
Yeah, sure, but I guess the invariant the isolator wants to enforce is that you're listening on sockets that you've been allocated by the master, right? So if you're listening on any sockets, I don't think that if you're listening on an ephemeral port range socket is really different than if you're listening on some other port that you haven't been allocated, because I think the goal is to make sure that you're only listening on things that you are allocated. So maybe as an option maybe optionally you could ignore the ephemeral port range, but I think the goal is to not do that.
I think especially I think command executor is like a breakup rule. They're essentially it's not using a port that's being allocated to him. So yeah, I think once we address the using domain socket for communication between command executor and agent, we should not have that issues. I'm not sure about like the custom executors that use lib process drivers. I don't think it's just an issue for command executor. Like it's an issue for things like thermals as well, I think.
Yes, it would be. It's an issue for everything that uses lib process.
Yes.
But HTTP-based executors should be fine. So I'm going to try and write some tests with task groups to verify that the default executor works correctly.
Yeah, I think maybe a short-term workaround is you look at the local port range, IP local port range, and exclude those ports from the ports they're enforcing. You're only enforcing those ports specified by the operator on the agent flag, and make sure that only those ports are enforced. No one can ever listen on a port in that particular range that's not assigned to him. So that might be a short-term workaround to bypass that command executor or any executor that's using the lib process driver. So another question, what's the overhead of this one? I think scanning the whole proc file system is going to be quite expensive. Have you do any experiment, see how expensive that operation is? I think we ran into an issue at Twitter a long time ago that if you have too many connections, then it's pretty expensive.
So it's fairly expensive. So basically what you have to do is you track your set of containers. Then for each container, you find all the processes in the freezer C group. Then for each process in the freezer C group, then you scan you scan every file descriptor until you find the sockets. And then for each socket, you check whether it's in the set of things that are listening, and you verify that against your port range. So it's quite an expensive check. I have a kernel patch. Well, basically you can make a trivial kernel patch to publish the network class ID for the socket. So if you look at the netlink code, if anyone on this chat would like to publish a kernel patch, which is super trivial and obvious, to publish the class ID from the socket diag netlink call, then you can leverage the class ID to immediately figure out which C group and which container a socket belongs to. So you can optimize all of this work can go away with a small bit of trivial kernel support. Oh,
I see. So you're talking about in the IDAG messages from netlink, you include the class ID of the C group for that container.
Exactly. So then you can run the class ID isolator in conjunction with this isolator.
I see.
And you can short circuit all the grungy work of scanning of file and poking around in proc.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I think that's better in terms of performance. Yeah. But I don't think kernel patch is always anyway.
If we are going the kernel patch, probably we need. It literally looks like we need a cgroup for ports, which we don't have right now. Probably, literally, it feels like we should have a cgroup for ports if you're going the kernel path route.
But that's going to be much harder, right?
Yeah,
having a new cgroup is going to be much harder. I think the class ID might be very trivial to do.
Okay.
I can think of that. But yeah,
anyway, the class ID the class ID is like a 5-line patch.
Yeah.
So if anyone would like to contribute a 5-line patch to the kernel, that would be extremely helpful.
The thing is, you have to also backport to the kernel you guys are currently using.
Sure, but anyone can do that. Like once it's upstream, then
okay.
I think that it's easy to backport. At least, and also we run stable kernels anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, for us, it's much easier to say, hey, backport this kernel backport this small patch from Linux's tree, and run it in your stable kernel than it is to say, look, we should carry along this add a tree patch.
Okay, so sounds good. I think like my only concern is just performance, because I think I did some experiment like a long time ago at Twitter, where like a host has a lot of connection, that operation is really slow in the order of like multiple seconds. Just be careful like on the performance implication. Like what's the interval of doing that scan, like things like that.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about this one, and the way it works now is, it's similar performance and overhead to the POSIX the disk DU isolator, right? So
yeah,
you're running a periodic scan, and you're doing a best effort based on the kernel facilities that you have.
Yeah. All right. Did you find a shepherd for this work?
No, I was going to say I'm looking for shepherds. So anyone who's interested, I'd like to talk to you.
I mean, anyone here kind of volunteer to shepherd this work? Okay, so I think I can think of the best person is Chen, who is a committer in China, and I think he's not on this call due to time difference. But I'm gonna ping him, see if he's interested in that. I think he's the one that wrote the CNI isolator that he might have the context for this one too. So I'll try to ask him, see if he has time to shepherd this work, and get back to James on this.
Thanks.
Yeah. Right. Sounds good. I think we don't have 1 minute left. I think I have a hard stop at 10. So thank you very much. And I think I'll try to add in notes to the doc and publish the recording. And the next time the tentative agenda is me talking about the container-based isolator. It's kind of like a thoughts on our design. And I think last time there's one action item, which is like gonna schedule a meeting on the volume ownership cleanup. I think I've scheduled a meeting, so it's gonna be right after July 4th holiday. We're gonna do that. And if you have anything else you want to do in the next time, please feel free to add the agenda item into the doc, and we're gonna make sure that to make sure like we have enough time for that. All right, thank you everyone, and see you guys next time. Have a great holiday.
All right, yeah.
Cheerio.
Cheers.
Thank you, G.